And I was there early, which was hard to believe because I wasn't on an athletic field, but I was there early. And Stick happened to be there. And Bill Oates comes in the back door. And I was talking away, looking this way, and he comes up behind me, and he takes me and throws me up against the wall and says, "Isn't this a little bit too much noise in here?" And, when you're only in the 8th grade, you're a little perturbed by the vice rector throwing you up against the wall. At any rate, Stick takes me right over to Happy Hulser and said, "This was the thing was wrong here. This guy was not in the wrong," and Bill Oates threw him up against the wall. So Stick, to you for sticking up for me, and quite frankly, Bill Oates was really nice to me from there on. And he realized. But you did that well. But there's a lot of other things, and there were a lot for me that revolved around already 3 minutes. Was sports, obviously going to the Garden.
It's okay, Chris. You can have my 3 minutes.
Okay. Pretty special when you go to the Madison Square Garden and you're a kid, and I played 3 years down there, and it was always when the Rangers were playing that night, and probably the best was our junior year when the Blackhawks were playing. And when you're a kid, and of course we had Mita Chase, and Mita he was a great math teacher, could skate, but he didn't really know how to coach, unfortunately. So we got there a half an hour early for our morning skate, and so we were already off the ice. And suddenly the Blackhawks went out for their morning skate, and the guys from Choate were sitting there, and Dennis Hull and Stan Mikita went out on the ice. And then Bobby Hull comes out and goes, "Hey, come on, guys, come out." And so we were sitting there going, "What? We couldn't skate with the Blackhawks?" And the Choate goalie is down here, warming up the ice, and Bobby Hull goes behind the far net, comes to the far blue line, and goes, "Hey, goalie." And the goalie looks up, sees Bobby Hull. He lets go a slap shot, which was the hardest around, from the far blue line. The Choate goalie dives out of the goal. It goes right into the upper corner, and Brian Everett said, "Damn, I would have stayed in there for that one." But probably more so, again, it's sports related, but as you recall, we had lots of tensions at the time between the townies and up here. And, God love him, Russ Ingersoll decided to have a hockey tour over to Sweden. And, those were the bloodbaths in the preseason against, Duncan Rainier and the Matthews brothers. I mean, these were good hockey players. And we had some battles, but Russ determined that we would join and go over. And there are some hysterical times we had. And after that, there was absolutely no problem once we got together. And probably another thing is you probably all remember my dad, because he probably came to every game that the three sons played in up here, and he'd sit on the bench while my mother was behind talking to a master's wife, because she couldn't stand the fact that we all played football, hockey, and lacrosse and all these blood sports. Meanwhile, my dad was sitting there going, go in, hey, Moose, put him in. At any rate, it was a wonderful time. I had many friends here, as I said, extended, which go on. Hi and I still see each other, fortunately, a lot, and it means a lot to me that so many of our friendships, continue on. And there's sort of a full circle of life. Our Steve Moorhead, our sons they went to grade school together. They went, Sam Moorhead came up here. My son went to another school, and they rejoined in college, and now they're working together and living together in Boston and starting the whole circle again. So it's a great place. Lots of good memories, and I did try to get, and I unfortunately could not, but I called Mike Hirschfield, who's now the vice rector, head of alumni affairs, and said, "You've got to come up and find my ISP of senior year." And I don't know if you remember that, but what I did was I photographed all the other ISPs and put it together in the form of a slideshow. So I would have had, I remember Brooke Roberts making his kayak, and Charlie Wagner, disassembling and reassembling, his MG, and I had all the other ones there, and I'm sorry that Mr. Hirschfeld could not find it. It's somewhere in the archives, but good times and many friendships, as it's all been said, and that's it for me.
So, I learned a lot of things at St. Paul's, but really the thing that stands out for me is this is the place where I found my voice. As a little kid growing up, I was very shy. I mean, I was like incredibly shy. I was so shy that, like as a 10-year-old, for me to go up at a drugstore and buy a candy bar at the counter, that was an incredibly painful experience. I think this is the place where, to some degree, I kind of got over that and found my voice. There are probably a lot of ways that happened. One might be just kind of the round table, the classroom round table experience, where they're kind of out there, which was a good thing for me. But probably the thing that really stands out in my mind is some of the experience I had working on the Pelican. And of course, Alec and I were working there together, and as editor, we had our share of run-ins in that tumultuous time, and kind of like Alec related earlier at the chapel. I had some of those as well. I remember there were 2 times when Matt Warren called me into his office and very clearly threatened me with expulsion for what I had written, about such radical topics as the dress code and whether or not chapel should be voluntary or compulsory, which were hot topics at the time. And of course, this was the Vietnam War was raging. That was kind of the backdrop. So in hindsight, when I think about that, if he had actually made good on one of those threats, I actually think that might have created a bunch of problems for Matt Warren, to use such a silly excuse to throw somebody out. Of course, he didn't. But I also thank the Lord that he didn't find another excuse, because there certainly were plenty. So it goes. But it was just a place where I think we all shared and learned a lot together. And for me, it's pretty a transformative experience and great place. Thanks. Yeah, actually, maybe just an addendum, since Stick mentions Woodstock. Those sessions with Matt Warren came just after the summer that Tony King and the Stick and Charlie Reed and I spent a few days at Woodstock, and the rest I don't remember.
Chris just touched on something that I was going to talk about, which is...
What's your name?
I've forgotten. I grew up in Concord, and when I came to St. Paul's, if anyone was the stranger in a strange land, it was me. I had no concept of what this school was like. There was no connection between St. Paul's School and Concord, New Hampshire. And so over the time that I was here, I am not, like everyone else, I'm not only extremely grateful for these opportunities and what I got, but for me it seems that the person that came in and the person that left had the opportunity just to see so much change in such a short period of time. And what I value most about this experience is the fact that the people, particularly the faculty, who to this day are still the people that ring first in my mind, were all those that I think we probably would have normally associated as the old school, because they were the element of constancy. And Phil Burnham, who, as far as I'm concerned, was the greatest professor of literature that I ever had in my life. Cliff Gillespie, who was just uncompromising in his sort of moral compass. And he was a great coach, he was a great teacher, and he had the best block printing that I've ever seen in my life.
Multiple colors.
And finally, Andre Hurtgen, who, as far as I was concerned, was the person who was singularly responsible for getting me through third form year. He was that grounding that always encouraged me and always said, you know, this doesn't really, it's not as strange as it seems. So for that, I'm extremely grateful. The other sort of highlights that I remember most, Dana Hall. For me, it was the one time that I truly felt invincible. And not only that, but it was the short, brief period of time when I had no responsibility and didn't have to worry about being completely irresponsible. Finally, I keep coming back here for all of these people. And like others have said, I had great friends in college, but I don't go really back to my college reunions as I do to these. This is different, and I don't fully understand why. Maybe it's the age, but it's different. And I keep coming back because this group keeps making it interesting.
Yeah, others have talked about in effect, why this is such a great institution and what advantages it gave you and so forth. But what I want to talk about was something much more simple, and that was that one of the really fundamental lessons that I learned here, and I look around you and I see many of the people that learned the same lessons, was in schoolboy sports and the great value of teamship, and that how a team of people could achieve so much more than the individuals. And this really, in most of it, was in the sports teams. And I look around, and I see people I played sports with here, and there are other teams I wasn't good enough to play on, and so forth. But I'm sure they all had the same experience of being able to create more out of the team than they ever could as individuals. And that, to me, was the great lesson of this school. And it was a huge opportunity to be able to play team sports at a relatively high level. But it wasn't always as sports. I wanted to mention one particular thing that I will never forget, which was the great love story of 1969, which I want to hear more about from Guy Nuri, which was in its own way one of the great team efforts of this form. And I don't know how many of you were into that, but it was one of these things that just sort of happened, and it was one of our sort of greatest victories. And it was kind of a throw-off. It just kind of happened, and you were all there. But I wanted to really thank Guy and, by extension, Bill Abbey and all the other people who were involved in that for one of the truly, great experiences. Anyway, before the buzzer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just going to mention a couple of experiences because for me, St. Paul's was about experiences. We all had a great educational experience here, I think, but with Pete Culver, I watched Nat Wheelwright's snake eat a mouse. With Mr. Blair, I hitchhiked into Boston and we went to a Scientology lesson. With Brooke Roberts, we did all kinds of crazy stuff in Nash senior year that we can't really talk about in public. With Dan Danziger, I climbed up onto the top of the tower of the chapel the morning before graduation, the year before we graduated, and watched Matt Warren come out and fetch his paper in his bathrobe. With John Ledbetter, who I tried to get to come tonight. Dance weekend, our senior year, we went out with our dates and made a meal in the woods for our dates. We built a fire, we cooked steaks, I went into,
How did it turn out?
the steaks were good. The rest of the night was hell. But, you know, because we were making a good meal, of course you have to have a little wine. So I went into Concord, it's a state wine store. And this was a fairly dangerous enterprise for a St. Paul student.
Not for you.
And
I think
so
we all know the
so I'm in the wine store, and in comes Mrs. Wells.
Mrs. Wells herself?
Mrs. Wells came in, and the rest of that story will be told later. But you know, I played sports with many of you. I enjoyed Nash House experiences with Fritz, with Chris Bartle. You know, the classroom experiences and the discussions were intellectually stimulating. Watching Craig play drums on the lawn, John Martin. It was always great to talk politics and interesting things with him. It was just a great band of brothers, as we've been dubbed by our wonderful organizer and leader, Steve Crandall. Amo Houghton, you know, priceless contributor in all ways. But for me, the St. Paul's experiences was not just the classroom, which was great. It was not just the teachers, which they were great too, but it was the personal interactions, the way of living in an atmosphere like this, a unique, different kind of experience. It was memorable. It still is fresh in my mind. And I love coming back to these situations every 5 years because I like thinking of these recollections. I think of being with you guys today, tomorrow, and in the 60s. So thank you for being here, and thank you for being my friends and experience mates.
All right, I've no idea what I'm going to say, but my, I like Alec. I came here on the rebound. You know, I have a lifelong pattern of only learning things when I hit a wall, and I hit a wall when I was 13 in a little town in the South, and I was, you know, persona non grata at the local public school, and so I got the opportunity of a lifetime to, you know, by coming here. I chose St. Paul's over Exeter and Pomfret because the first guy I met, in those days, their attitude toward admissions was exemplified by the fact that the guy who showed you around was on work squad. And there was something about that that I really liked. So Walker Wainwright, you know, in a very grumpy mood on a Saturday afternoon, showed me and my parents around, you know, kind of, there's a schoolhouse, there's a chapel. You know, this place sucks. See you later. You know, whereas at Pomfret, you know, that headmaster came out, hey, we'd love to have you here, you know. No, it was love at first sight. The fact that my grandfather was paying for it had absolutely nothing to do with my decision, since I didn't know that at the time. But so I mean, you know, and I had a you know, really terrific learning experience here that I just would not have had in the public schools in Charlottesville, Virginia. In fact, you know, I would have had, you know, I would have ended up in the big house. There's just no question. And that's just where I was headed. And but instead, I get a chance to meet really exciting. I got introduced to a world that, you know, it was really full of opportunity, and it turned out to be full of greater opportunity than I thought, because at the end of the day, you know, I don't really know what I learned here, because I'm always revising what I'm learning, and I have, you know, I'm very self-conscious but not very self-aware, and so I have the, you know, I'm never quite sure, you know, what my character is at any particular moment. I don't think it's been formed yet, frankly. But I got a chance to meet some terrific masters. And you know, I think if it hadn't been for Gary Studs, you know, I just think my world would have been a lot smaller. If it hadn't been for McDonald, I think my world would have been a lot smaller. And it was okay. Whereas in Charlottesville, it was okay to be a car thief and a juvenile delinquent and a you know, a tough guy. Here it was okay to like love fiction, you know, and you know, fiction frankly was embarrassing to you know, to the people I was hanging out with in Virginia. And you know, it really was a liberating experience for me. But in the end, what I really got was you guys and the continual interaction. And you know, what I really love in life is interaction with intelligent, or you know, actually intelligence isn't even a requirement. People with because as I get as I
A little broader, so we include everybody here.
the older I get, the less intelligent I am to myself. So you know, intelligence is really it's beside the point. But what I really like about what I got here is interest in my fellow man, and that's what sustains me, and that's what you know, and that's what you know, keeps me going when I'm you know, when I'm wondering what it's all about, which is, you know, for better or worse, fairly often. You know, the experience of this reunion has been great because there was a lot that led up to it. It didn't fall out of the sky like it did, you know, the previous 5-year intervals. You know, you show up here and you know, but this time there was some preparation with Eigehart and Crandall and others, and particularly Charlie Wagner. And you know, it really feels like, you know, in a way I belong. And it's always been an issue for me, feeling like I belong, believe it or not. And it's, you know, it's a great, great honor to be part of this. Thanks.
Well, I'm really happy to be here. I didn't come to a reunion until our 25th reunion. And today I was trying to figure out why would I have stayed away for so long. And it dawned on me it was because I was here for such a goddamn long period of time. I was here from the time I was 13 until the time I was almost 19. I was here for 6 years. And I grew up on St. Simon's Island, Georgia, where we never saw a snowflake. And so I came to this bizarre world in New England where we had these Siberian winters. And I had the job, by the way, my first year, my work-study job, or whatever it was called, was to shovel the walkway behind the lower that went up to the infirmary. And I remember going out there and shoveling forever. It now doesn't look so large, but when I was 13, it was absolutely huge. So I came back for the 25th reunion, and that was really a bizarre experience because Don Lippincott, in particular, reminded me of a number of things that had happened in our first and second form year that I had completely repressed, completely forgotten. For example, we had a reference earlier to Physahex, and I had a huge Physahex bottle in my alcove, which Mr. Ball, who was our dorm master, never figured out was a squirt gun. So when he saw water going out of my alcove, he would whip the curtain open, say, "Martin, do you have a squirt gun?" I say, "No." And he would look right at the Physahex bottle. And he never once determined that that was the squirt gun. But the most extraordinary story that Lippincott reminded me of, which I again had completely repressed, was that Bill Fletcher, whom many of you had the privilege of knowing, from Culpeper, Virginia, had a Confederate flag in his alcove, which one day I removed from the wall of his alcove, folded as we fold flags into that nice triangular form, and placed in a urinal in our bathroom. And that actually led to an attempted homicide. And I'm really actually lucky to be here. So coming back to the 25th was important to me because it reminded me of all of these whimsical, funny, odd, strange things that had happened here. And I think in my first 25 years out, I was still dealing with a lot of the more serious and weighty things that had happened here. But when I think about this experience, I think that for me, there were really two contrasts. One, I was a Southerner going to a school in New England. And when I went home, I went back to a completely different world than the world at St. Paul's, and vice versa. And that got me thinking, I think at a young age, without really knowing it, about the differences between cultures and how people think in different cultures, without necessarily being overly judgmental about either group. Seeing that people come from certain places, I think, was important to me. And the other thing was that we were here at a fascinating time. When I came, we went to chapel twice on Sunday, and every day we had sit-down meals, I think 6 times a week. It was a very formal, a very strict place. There were no girls here, if you recall, and it was a kind of weird environment in that sense. And then, pardon? It was like 19th century England. And then when we left, it was a much different place. And I think it was remarkable that we got through that transition as easily as we did. The class of '68 did not have the best of times, but we did get through it. And I think that had a lot to do with the faculty, it had a lot to do with the student body, it had a lot to do with other leaders on the campus and the administration. And I think that people, despite their sharp differences with each other, managed to see that the community that we had was maybe more important than our individual differences. And so I'm going to stop in just a second. I certainly think that this was a great education in terms of learning about differences, having a different world that one got to know, getting to know a lot of really terrific classmates over the years. It meant a huge amount to me, and it still does. And this is only my second reunion, but I hope to be here many, many more times. It's good to see you all.
I'm in awe of you guys, and the secret is that I always have been. There were plenty of you that were just breathtakingly more intelligent than I was, and I found it hard, even though I